We started the build of Casey, or Repstat as it was called, in '65. It was all built 8 to 10 feet off the ground, up a big slope, and the theory was that when the wind or when the drift came in, it went over the top and it went underneath, so the drift wouldn't build up and close.
Just like a Queenslander,
yeah.
You know, on stilts.
Yeah, up on stilts, yeah, that's what it was. Massive amounts of 2-inch holes in the ground.
Mosses basically built on
rocks,
on the rocks, yeah.
Everything, because the ice moves, so you have to build on rocks, basically. And so, yeah, we dredged all these holes, filled them up, and then all braced them all so that we hoped they wouldn't move in the wind.
The Americans sort of gave you the old base.
The old Wilkes Base, yeah.
And then you transferred that a few kilometres down the road to the new Casey base.
New Casey, yeah.
So was there any reason for Casey being there? Is it better harbour?
Wilkes was just too dangerous. Because of the fuel soaked in the building. It's partially underground, it's deteriorating fairly rapidly. During summer, when the level of the melt, we had, in pretty much every building, we had a pump there, pumping water out of the buildings.
So it's literally waterlogged.
Water level came up until it broke through, until it could sort of go down into the bay. Yeah, it just became too dangerous a place to. So that was why the decision was made to build Casey, and it was just across the bay. It was, to get around by land, it was about 3 or 4 kilometres around. It was about 1.5, 2 kilometres across the bay. So in '65, we would go over, have a couple of days break or something. Once we got 1 or 2 of the buildings up, we'd get a dog sledge and you put the motorbike in the front of it, and you sit on the dog sledge and go across the sea ice. Or in some cases, some of the guys even got the dogs out and used the dogs to go across.
Did you have a couple of teams there, or just 1 or 2?
Oh,
Mawson had 2 separate teams.
Oh yeah, two teams. We had at least 2 teams of dogs. Our plumber was the man. He had no dog training at all, but you have a handover period. The guy who used the dogs the year before, he sort of, during the changeover, you crank up a team and head off up on the plateau and say, this is how you do it.
Yeah,
it's all yours, mate. Carry on.
Yeah. It was interesting because, you know, dog team's quite complex to handle, because you've got to be dominant, you've got to be, know the commands that they know.
End up with the plumber, and of course some of the scientific boffins, they did a few odd trips out, and some of them were absolute disasters. We had to go out and rescue some of them at different times. Come home the easy way across the sea ice, but once you've had a blow, there's no sea ice there. You've got to come back across all the, worried about bloody crevasses all the time. They were always a worry. At one stage in the piece, I ended up down a crevasse, walked out of the back of a vehicle and disappeared down. Frightens the living daylights out of you. But
so you just fall into this hole, and it's black, and you go, oh, how do I get out of this one?
We were putting some survey markers in. All they were was a big flat black disc. And we started from the base and we worked our way out, and with a guy who doing all the surveying, surveyed our way through, and we put these things. These were known fixed positions. We were right down on the coast putting these in, where it sort of comes down toward the end of the coast, and I just stepped out of the snow track and walked a couple of paces, and next thing I know, I'm about 15 feet down. And,
you're lucky you didn't, that was it?
Yeah. Bloody nose, bloody red and bloody harm, all the back of my hand. I'm sitting there, I don't know whether I'm dead or alive. Blue-green ice, and it's got red spots on it, and I don't know what the hell was going on. And next you know, you all right down there, Wiggy?
Would you out again?
But crevasses were always a worry when you're out in the field, working out in the field. And the food supply at Wilkes was incredible, the amount that the Americans dumped there. Even in '69, we were still using the American ice cream with a powder. The Americans were great at using powder stuff, packets of soup and all that sort of stuff out in the field. So dehydrated potatoes and all that sort of stuff. It made it a lot easier out in the field.
When you sit there and go, hey, why can't we have this stuff? Oh, no, that's the Americans. Because they had a massive operation just after the war in Antarctica, 46, 47.
Yeah, 47, 48, and then the big one was the International Geophysical Year, and 57, 58 was the big one. But and that's when they put the Wilkes Base in there, which we were lucky. Phil negotiated with the Americans, and it was all lend-lease equipment, so nothing was allowed to leave the base. You could use it, destroy it, do whatever you like with it. They didn't care, but it was not allowed to leave, so nothing was allowed to leave the base, because it was all on that lend-lease basis. So yeah, some of the equipment there was absolutely mind-boggling that we had at Wilkes, stuff that we'd never ever seen before. The gensets, but the old Caterpillar gensets, all 110 volt stuff too. And in the workshop, where we say we had the two gensets running in the workshop all the time, so it was nice and noisy in there. But if you wanted to plug something in, the Americans don't have switches.
Oh.
There's no switches on their power points. They're just power points sitting there. So you get in your rubber boots, and because the floors were all steel plates, they were wooden floors with steel plates over the top, and you'd make sure that
you're not earthed
you'd plug it in and stand back and I'm still haven't got 110 volts. And that's the crazy part, because everything was underground. If anything failed for the scientific boffins, quite often they had timelines and all that sort of thing that they needed, and every now and then they would disappear. Everything was literally under the ice, so you just abandoned it and you ran a new cable wherever you needed it to, because it was a waste of time trying to chase a cable. We had the two gensets running in the workshop all the time and 3 in the powerhouse.
So basically your mission was to be there to service and run diesel generators and things like that.
Yep.
Keep them running.
And the field work, big field.
So that's supporting the boffins going out to do their thing.
Yes.
During the winter time, what would you be doing then? Just routine maintenance, because that's
routine maintenance and getting your vehicles ready. You see, we did 4 different field trips in 1965, and luckily when you go in very quickly, you try and get one field trip out of the road, and then the next one that was say late September, early October we took off, and that was 6 weeks out there doing geophysical, doing explosions every 10 miles. We would stop and set up the geophones and do an explosion. Every 1 mile in between, we would making sure that we knew our height above sea level, so we're using devices to make sure that we knew what our height was. So we'd refer back to the base and would take a barometric reading, and then we had digital barometers up on the thing. So every mile we would stop with a digital barometer, and then we would work back to a person back there, and then to another person.
So triangulate them.
So you kept on doing, and we did a square. And then for the second one, field trip, we had a triangle down there which started at the top of the dome, went down to the coast, went across the coast and then back up, and we were measuring the movement of ice. So we started at the top. Around about every half, 3/4 of a kilometre, we had a stake in the ground. So we were the first one to use electronic measuring devices. So we had a stake, and we would look forward, we would look backwards, we'd move to the next stake and look forward, look backwards, and checking our elevation, checking our angles with the odd light. Very, very slow. And for the first field trip, if we got 10 kilometres in a day, we reckon we were doing well.
Is that one of the reasons why you think there's a wintering group, so they can prepare for the great summer work ethic?
It's the start of the season. When you see ice is still there, you're unreliable to be getting in there. You had to wait till the ships get in, so the ships would get there in November or December, and next thing you know, a couple of months later, your season's finished. We had to make sure that the D4s and the snow tracks, you could go out and spend 6 weeks out in the field without working on them. We did the grid that we had to do, and we used to move 5 kilometres either side of it. It was quite a big program. In '65, I probably ended up doing something like about 800 kilometres over the period of time down there, sitting in a D4, and the other guys sitting in the snow tracks. We had the 2 D4s, we had 2 snow tracks. And we also had an old weasel, the old American weasels, that we still had a couple of them going, and that was just set up as a dark room. And because the tracks were absolutely useless on them, most of the time we had it on a sledge. But there's snow tracks, they did hundreds and hundreds of kilometres. Every 10 kilometres we would go down, and then they would do 5 kilometre either side as well. We had a few odd breakdowns, but generally speaking, we were very lucky with our equipment.
And you'd be living in sort of like fortified caravans, as your mobile home.
Yeah.
And would you be having somebody make food for you, or you would just go and get the ration packet or whatever?
You had your sleeping caravan. In that, and then we had the. They call them apples nowadays, RMIT caravan with a fiberglass caravan. That was the cooking caravan. Our cooking was done with gas, so you had to make sure we had what was called a chicken incubator actually along the bottom. You had to warm it up a bit to get it working, so we would do the cooking in that and the sleeping in the caravan. And the worst part we had in 65 was that we didn't have power in the caravans, so all of our lighting was telly lamps. They were telly, but we used petrol in a pressure lamps.
Pump them up.
Pump them up, hang them up on the roof, and of course what happens is the vent blocks up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In 65 there was always an argument between Mark, I think I mentioned in the story I wrote, Mark Forecast, who was one of our weather guys as a matter of fact. I say that it was him got up to go for a piss and finally couldn't stand up at the caravan, or the vent had blocked up, all full of carbon monoxide.
Yeah.
We nearly lost 4 of us.
Yeah.
And the year before, they had lost a bloke in Wilkes, in Reg Sullivan.
Yeah, it's a real issue, isn't it?
Died in a caravan because we didn't have power. We used to keep them just above freezing point in the living caravan, but we kept them very cold. But of course, with these things burning petrol sitting up there, what are you going to do? You're laying in your bunk reading a book or whatever. The vent would block up, and so we'd end up filling up with carbon monoxide. And so we were, the 4 of us were lucky to survive in 65. We nearly didn't came back.
And then you wonder why the dogs won't live in their kennels. Because apparently up in Mawson they made up kennels. They want to stay out in the open and they bury themselves in the snow.
They just duck down and let the snow build up over them.
Okay, let's just move forward to the end of your jaunt in 69 was the last time you went there?
69, yeah.
Was it, from your point of view, that's going to be a last trip, or was it you were going to come back again but it just never happened?
I would have been prepared to go back again. We didn't have a particularly good year in 69, not like 65 was a magic year. We had a great bunch of guys. We had a very good 69. It was nowhere near as good a year. We had a few odd problems. We had the 4 Americans there. They were all right. They did their satellite work. They were quite good. But I would have been prepared to go back again. So I came back here and I got involved with a friend of mine who had a Ford dealership, and I went up and opened another dealership up in Merredin for him. And it's the next thing I know, I'm bloody married again, and all these things.
And that's literally what happens.
And I ended up spending 13 years in Port Hedland. Oh no, look, they were great. The times I spent down there were incredible times, absolutely incredible times.
It's funny how it's literally a couple of years in your life.
Yes, they've been so dominant in the rest of my life, that's for sure. Great.
So we should use this as a promotional thing for the current generation to say, get down there while it's still a pristine wilderness.
It's always a very, very dangerous place to be down there.
That's right.
Things are considerably different and a damn sight more comfortable than they were in my day down there, but it's still an extremely dangerous place. You step outside them buildings, you don't know what's going to happen.
That's right. And that's what we're talking about with the blizzards that Phil had. One of his friends literally got blown off the blizz line and was rolling down the base, nearly onto the sea ice. Goodbye, see you later.
At the old Wilkes Base, where we had to refuel twice a week, I would be up on the roof, turning the taps on and off with a rope around me.
Yeah.
Because when it's real bliss, you have apart from knowing which way the wind's blowing, that's the only thing, because you can't see anything. If you've got glasses on, they're all covered in snow and you can't see where you're going. So you end up on your hands and knees, crawling around on top of the roof, turning a tap, and you have a rope around your waist so that you know how to find your way back.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Did you actually get any frostbite while you were there?
The main one was in 65 when we were decanting the fuel in the middle of the year. You tend to forget, say, 800 drums of fuel I think we had to decant in the middle of the winter. And so you got your gloves on and everything, but the gloves would deteriorate, and all you do is getting a 44-gallon drum, taking the top out, putting a spear in, till next drum, in the middle of it, the storm comes up and blows half your drums away, and then you've got to go and find your drums. But the gloves would deteriorate, and what you tend to forget, it's a liquid, so you think it's all right, but it's a liquid at minus 30.
Exactly.
So the next thing you know, you come in for lunch and you realise that you've never felt so much pain in all your life, because all the tips of your fingers are white, and then they start to thaw out. When they're thawing out, it's really, really painful. The previous year in Davis, guy down there, the mechanic down there, lost both his toes. When you're out working out in the field, you've got to keep your eye on your mates.
You've got to concentrate, really concentrate, because this is bang.
You've got to be very careful when you park at night that you split the whole team up, so you pull up across the wind, so you pull the pin on that one and then you move forward 10 feet, pull the pin, so you separate the whole caravan. I remember on the first field trip we ended up there and we were split in for 3 days. Never moved, got up, split everything up, put everything back together again, moved 200 yards and then spent another 3 days split in again.
One other thing, just before we finish, have you got any interesting animal life encounters? You know, there's obviously great animal life around these bases now.
Seals and the penguins were the main one, and see, we were unfortunate. I think it was in '65 we lost our eggs. So they treat the warm store was the important thing. Everything was frozen, but we had a warm store where we kept the beer. No way that needed to freeze. And we had potatoes and as much stuff as you could kept in the warm store. Apparently the eggs, they used to treat them with a wax before they went down there. And apparently in '65 something went wrong and all of our eggs went off.
It's just like, what? How could they go off?
We had powdered egg, of course. We had plenty of stuff to keep us going, but we didn't actually have eggs until the penguins came along.
Oh.
Yeah. Don't really enjoy penguin eggs.
They're bigger than normal eggs.
They're much bigger, and when you cook them, they don't go white.
Oh.
It stays looking translucent. It looked terrible. It was all right for cakes and that sort of thing, but and then the funny thing, in '69 trip, our bacon went off, our ham went off. That hadn't been cured properly.
So that was sealed.
Quick question: were they emperor penguin or Adelie penguin?
Adelie. We had we had one or two odd emperor, but no, we only had the Adelie penguins. And they would come up, and of course we had the dog line, all the dogs were lined up there, and the Adelie penguins would come along, and the dogs, they were really cunning. They'd be sitting there barking their head off, but they'd have about 4 feet of rope behind them. Next thing you know, they'd use that 3 or 4 feet and they'd grab the penguin, because once a penguin decides it's going to go somewhere, that's where it goes. It doesn't deviate for anybody. And so unfortunately a few of them didn't make it through the dog line.
Because they can get quite aggressive too. Because Phil's got one about a penguin that attacked the dog team. Quite aggressive.
Yeah. But say we only had the Adelies there, and then in '69 we had an elephant seal come right down near the base. A big monster of a thing they were. He must have got lost or something. He was sitting on the beach. I think he was pretty crook, but mainly the Adelie penguins were the ones that we had down there. They're funny little buggers, they are.
So where you just because they're obviously roosting at that time with their eggs, just go and pitch a few for the cake mix.
Yeah, cake mix.
Because they don't use them for anything else.
Yeah. Oh, they used to nest her in there. A little pile of stones, and this one's always pinching stones off this one. They're funny little buggers. Yeah. Of course, the incredible ones are the emperors, where they go so far inland, and the male sits there with the egg sitting there and up against his belly, and how they go so far inland, go bloody hundreds of miles in some instances. They go inland to come across the sea ice and bring their baby up. And she goes off and goes out and has a feed, and he sits there for bloody months on end.
Just living on his blubber.
Wait till the babies come along.
Because that's the beauty of penguins. They look cute and cuddly, but they are very, very tough.
Oh,
to be able to survive in that environment.
Yeah. And it's great to see them come out of that water when they jump up, and when you can get them when they come out of the water onto the land. They're incredible little creatures. They're very strong. I say, if you get a whack from those flippers, you know you've got it.
Finally, which you sort of left Casey Station, sort of what sort of time frame was it in February, March, or?
Very early February when we left.
On the Nella?
On the Thala.
Thala.
We were on, so and we had a long trip on the way back, because we came back via Dumont de Ville again, so we picked up some French at Dumont de Ville, and then we went across to Macquarie Island and took the last of the guys out of Macquarie Island and came back And the French guys that we picked up from Jumontville, they were working out of Hobart. They weren't working out of Melbourne. So the Thala called in to Hobart and dumped the French off, just stayed there for half a day sort of thing, and then came back to Melbourne. So we had a fairly long trip on the way back in.
A good thing in terms of just being able to unwind from the experience, warm up a bit, because you've gone from a very cold environment to the middle of summer.
The worst part you had was, so I can remember, I think it was probably the first trip after we came back, to get in a motor vehicle and you're heading off down the road 30, 40 k's an hour. The fastest you've been in a motor vehicle was about 3 k's an hour, and all of a sudden you're sitting in this traffic and cars and things. It's absolutely frightening when you first get back to get in a motor vehicle. You've got the other D4 and maybe a snow track with you, and that's all you've seen for the last 12 months. The maximum speed you've achieved is about 3 kilometres an hour sort of thing, and then all of a sudden you're in this traffic. That's probably one of the most frightening things that you notice.
But do they give you a sort of a debrief to help you to sort of slowly adjust? I suppose in those days...
In those days, no, we didn't debrief at all, not like they do nowadays. You did that psycho before you went down there.
And that was it.
And when you came back, you certainly weren't normal. We thought we were.
But from your perspective, that experience has been with you, and you've kept in touch with the whole thing.
Yes.
Constantly.
On the computer, probably once a week, I would look up to see what's happening at the bases down there. You have your midwinter dues and that sort of thing, and you catch up with some of the guys. And I think 4 or 5 occasions we used to go over there to Noosa, and we'd end up having a meeting there of guys over a number of years. Guys like Chompers Curry, I think he did 11 or 12 trips down there.
Yeah, some people, that's what there was. I thought it was a 1 year thing, but you've done quite a few.
No, a lot of the guys, especially in those days, almost a quarter of your team would have been people going back again. In 69, all the senior people in those days, Charlie Weir, who was the senior mechanic, myself, we'd been down before, Chompers had been down before, John Gillies had been down before, so we had a very good crew who knew what they needed to do down there. So much easier, irrespective of what the OIC says, the blokes who have been down before, and they know what they're doing, and it just makes the year travel so much easier.
Yes.
Later on now, of course, we have females introduced down there. In our days, it was a male-dominated thing. We didn't have females down there, we only had the male. Although some of the things that used to happen at midwinter do.
Well, I was just about to ask you about your midwinter do, you know, with
Cinderella, etc.
Well, Vonna was saying they went to surf icebergs.
Yeah.
So she swam out to the iceberg,
grabbed
onto the iceberg, you know, wobbled around a bit and was trying to surf it into the things like...
Yeah, they do a lot of that now. In both years that we were there, nobody went for a swim in the ice in those days. We were too bloody stupid to do that. But pretty much every year now, around about midwinter, they cut a hole in the ice and everybody goes for a swim.
My friend who's just there now, that's what they did.
Yeah, mad people, definitely. There's something wrong with all those people down there.
We have a very quick story. The Wilkes Great Dog Race of 1965. 1965, yes.
It wasn't until a number of years later that one of the guys that I'd been with in 1965 was coming over to Western Australia, so I had a bit of a look through some of my slides and some of the photos that I'd taken there, and lo and behold, I came across a diary that I had written in 1965. I never knew that diary existed until then. Since then, my wife has been good enough to type some of those dates up. And one of the funny ones that we did come across, which of course was the Great Wilkes Dog Race, which occurred, according to my diary, on the 8th of the 5th in 1965. Oh. So one of the guys we had down there was an ex-Navy man, one of our radio operators. He was always trying to run a book or betting on anything that you could think of. It was flies crawling up the wall. Exactly. We didn't have flies, but he would try and run a book on it. So he decided to run a book on our big Wilkes dog race. So what we had 2 teams of guys that would do this dog race. We put one of the snow tracks up on an area that was called the Tit, which was halfway up onto the plateau. We put one of the snow tracks up there. And the process was to go up around the snow track and come back down, and we would time them, so we didn't want to run 2 teams at the same time because all the dogs wanted to do was fight. They didn't want to play ball with anything other than fighting. But while they were running, they were great. So the first team took off, went round the snow track up the top of the hit and came back, and we timed them. And then the second team took off. Well, they got up the top to where the snow track was, and the lead dog decided that he wanted to go underneath the snow track instead of around it.
Yep.
So that was the big pile up. So by the time they dragged all the dogs out and got them down, and then on their way down, passing through the moraine, the rocky area there, one of the sled dogs decided to tip the actual sled over. A little bit later, the dog team arrived back by themselves, and much later, we had the two members of the team come following down after them. So I don't know who actually ended up winning the bet, but it would have been quite an interesting day for them.
The actual dog team without the people would have been quicker.
Oh yes, the other team was there, and then of course we had a dog fight, didn't we?
Yeah, of course.
Because we had an uncontrolled team there, and you've got no idea the way these dogs would fight. If they got together, the incredible thing was that you could walk in there, you could kick those dogs, you could do what you like, they would never touch you.
Yeah.
There's no way would they ever bite a person, but if they got in there, if there was a penguin around or if there was another dog around, it was mayhem, absolute mayhem. Why they're still not down there, I do not know, because they were incredible for the morale of all the men on the site.
Yeah, and it gave you something to grab hold of and talk to.
Grab hold of, yep.
And they give back as well, you know, because they do protect you in some respects.
Being a diesel man, a dog man and the diesel can't be friends, so I must admit that I only ever did one trip with the dogs, and that was one day we went out in the sea ice to get some seals or some meat for the for the dogs rather. But it was the only ever trip I did with the dogs. At one stage in the piece we had a team up at S2, which is about 70 odd miles inland from the base, and they got back from there to the base in 11 hours.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
Yep. Admittedly it was mostly downhill, but those dogs would work and work and work. They were incredible. We had Greenland dogs there, they were the big dogs, but they really knew how to pull, and if you could stop them fighting.
They love fighting, but extraordinarily enough, they don't actually do any damage to each other because they've got such thick.
And well, you say you could get in there and with your boots and
because you'd have to break
them
it up
apart. So you know when you got up, you put the long line out and you'd stake each individual dog so they couldn't get near one another. Once they'd had a good run, they were all right. But if you stop, soon as one of the dogs gets up and looks like he wants to fight the next one,
bang,
you're off again.
And you've got to keep fit to be on it with the dog team too, because you've got to run.
It's incredible how fast they could get up, and they would keep going. Their tongue would be hanging out the side there, and they'd dig up a little bit of snow on the way through. But yeah, every now and then you'd stop and have a bit of a break, and as soon as one of them stands up and looks at the dog next door, it's time to get going again.
Are you looking at me? Are you looking at me? Oh, well, that's fantastic for that. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll have to wrap it up now.
All right.
So I wish to thank you so much for your hospitality and your vast knowledge.
Great to remember all those times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they'll be immortalised on national TV on the interweb.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Well, folks, you've just heard a bit of real Antarctic history direct from the man himself who was there, Mr. Ron Wiggins, who was interviewed by Peter Niblett. So we hope you enjoyed it, and we'd like to give a special thanks to Ron for taking the time to give us all that information. Thanks, Ron.
Well done, everybody.